But first, it is the bugbear of shareholders, regulators and boards, executive pay. Just this month alone, Suncorp Supremo John Mulcahy quit the troubled company, but not before receiving a $1.2 million cash bonus. Meanwhile, Oz Minerals flagged almost $3 billion in write-downs, yet departing chief exec Owen Hegarty still collected a cool $8.35 million for merger-related expenses from the marriage made in hell between Oxiana and Zinifex. Here to discuss executive remuneration and continuous disclosure laws, I'm joined in Sydney by Philip Higginson, Managing Director of Australia's leading corporate governance company, ProNed, Australian Institute of Company Directors CEO John Colvin, and Company Director and former investment banker Paul Binstep. In Melbourne for you, former chair of the forerunner to ASIC, Henry Bosch AO, and in Canberra, Shadow Minister for Corporate Law, Chris Pearce, who's flown back to the capital early just to be part of the show. That is in contrast, has to be said, to certain ministers who use the get-out-of-jail excuse of being just too busy. So a special thanks to you, Chris, and indeed all of you for finding time to come on the show. Gentlemen, that issue, the vexing one, just who should control executive remuneration, shareholders, regulators or boards? It is something that I put to the minister, the responsible minister for corporate law, Nick Sherry, his office. Let's have a look at his response, then we'll get into the debate over this. Prime Minister, he says, announcing that the government is looking at this issue and the work is ongoing. I mean, you've got your survey out. This is the 09 remuneration survey on that. You say a third of company directors, if I'm correct, defer to the CEO when it comes to the CEO's own remuneration in concert with senior managers and advisors of that CEO. That's hardly, as it were, you know, good practice, is it?
Well, the issue there that we've commented on is whether the board is receiving advice from the CEO as to what his and his top team's salary should be. And somebody's got to provide that advice to the board. The board either has to get it themselves through remuneration consultants or rely on the chief executive presenting it to the board at a board meeting and discussing it and endorsing it. My view is that the board should be, more times often than not, in charge of engaging the remuneration consultant. So they're the person that is setting the terms of reference. They are the person to whom the remuneration consultant feels is the client rather than the chief executive. And the survey that we have produced just recently, Carson, shows that there are a large number of directors out there that are unhappy with the independence of the information they're receiving from remuneration consultants. Right. And that's very serious. May I just comment on who should set the salaries, because I don't disagree with most of the comments that have been said before. But as I've said to you on another occasion, in Paris on the 4th of March next month, there's going to be the ICGE, the International Corporate Governance Network, debating the issue whether regulators should set it, whether shareholders should set it, or whether boards should set it. Now, boards are inherently conflicted in setting their own fees, and I'm more on the non-executive side, obviously, than the executive side. Fair enough. Let's bring Henry into this debate at this point in Melbourne. Henry, top of the morning and top of the day to you, of course. Is it fair to say, can I make a sort of an analysis on this? Because NAB Chairman Michael Chaney says that indeed much of the remuneration that is reported remuneration earned by executives was never received on the basis that equity benefits do not vest, as you know, unless the company actually performs. So are we kind of getting a little bit ahead of ourselves and up in arms when in fact a lot of the times, the cold light of day, the money isn't getting paid out?
Well, I think that's perfectly true. It applies both to share payments and options, but also to short-term incentives, where the targets set, the hurdles to be cleared, aren't actually reached. And in that case, actual remuneration may be significantly less than what is put out as possible. But can I agree with what John Colvin and Philip Higginson have said? It is the board that should set these things. It is nonsense to think that regulators can do it, and the less government does, the better.
Yeah, well, that's a laudable, that's a fine proposition, but Philip, your respondents, they don't want a bar of it. 11% of respondents said they'd be prepared to accept.
Exactly. I mean, our respondents are 94% in favour of voluntary share ownership and payment in fees. And I think that mandatorily legislating or enforcing that is unfair. Executives aren't forced to take a percentage of their remuneration in shares, and I don't think that should be forced upon them. I mean, Richard Fuld, who paid himself really $480 million over 7 years and elected the chair of the Remuneration Committee, that's gross indecency in my opinion, and it's something that needs to be ironed out. I don't think people should be forced to do it, quite frankly.
Carson, people should be...
Coming from your position in terms of the recruitment onto those boards, is there not still a bias here towards appointing your own, your friends and mates rather than going for the independent?
You're absolutely right, and one of the key findings out of our survey was when we asked other company directors, now these are not disgruntled shareholders or people not in the know, but we asked directors, what did they think of the quality of the ASX top 200? Now, that's where 85% of the wealth of the ASX resides, and only 11% of those directors thought they were very good. Now, that's a bit of an indictment. And going back to Paul's point about shares... Just going back to shares, Paul's talking about listed companies. There are thousands of private companies whose shares aren't easily traded. How do you pay those directors with shares?
You wanted to... What changes are you planning to introduce, Minister, to see that companies are better corporately governed? He said APRA developing guidelines linking executive remuneration arrangements to issues of capital adequacy, sorry for the typo there, and risk in the financial sector. This work will inform the G20 process and the lead up to the April leaders meeting in London. Henry, to you in Melbourne on that one. You have got, it has to be said, it goes without saying, plenty of institutional memory of the way not just ASIC but indeed APRA now operates. If we're developing guidelines, if we're developing them, what certainty do we have? What certainty do we have, at least, that we're getting best practice if we still haven't developed the guidelines?
Well, the answer is we've got no certainty at all. We must always beware of the law of unintended consequences. When you try to introduce a regulation of the sort that's been talked about this morning, you run a serious risk that there will be bad unintended consequences. Now, can I give you an example? 25 years ago, I became managing director of a listed company. At that time, executive remuneration was a private matter. I was not in a position to bargain with the people that made me an offer. The offer they made was reasonably attractive, and I took it. That was universal at that time. 5 years later, in 1985, I was chairman of the NCSC, and I found the ministers debating whether or not they should have a disclosure of executive remuneration for the first time. I asked them why they wanted to do this. They said to keep the level down. In fact, they went ahead, and exactly the reverse occurred. Because everybody now knows what everybody else is getting, they are able to bargain and to ratchet up remuneration in the way that has caused a great deal of distress to many shareholders.
Philip, do we need a risk assessment person on the board, a specific role for that? Only about 7% of boards do it.
Well, my view would be not necessarily. I think boards are better off served with generalists rather than specialists. If boards need specialist advice, then they go to a good lawyer or they go to a good corporate finance person and they get fresh, up-to-date information. And I think stacking boards with specialists who become out of date with their speciality in a few years is not as good as having a board of excellent generalists rather than specialists.
Gentlemen, I would love to continue